Admiral Zorp slammed his tentacle on the polished quartz table, sending ripples through his gelatinous form. Order. I will have order in this council. The cavernous chamber of the Galactic Security Council gradually fell silent as representatives from over 300 species settled into their ergonomically customized seats. The chamber resembled a massive amphitheater with hovering platforms arranged in concentric circles, each adjusted to the atmospheric and gravitational preferences of its occupants. This emergency session of the Galactic Security Council is now in session, Zorp gurgled through his speech translator. For those just tuning in via neural link, we are here to discuss the reclassification of human vocalizations from Category 7 biological curiosity to Category 1 weapon of galactic destruction. A murmur rippled through the assembly. Category 1 was reserved for extinction-level threats like antimatter bombs, engineered superviruses, and reality-destabilizing quantum anomalies. Ambassador Creel of the Arachnoid Consortium raised 3 of her 8 limbs. This is preposterous. I've studied human physiology for decades. Their sound-producing mechanism is primitive at best. How could it possibly warrant Category 1? Perhaps the esteemed ambassador hasn't reviewed the footage from Outpost Epsilon 9, countered General Blixar, his crystalline form refracting light in agitated patterns. 3 dead, 17 in permanent psychological trauma, structural damage across 4 levels, and an automated defense system triggered into thinking it was under attack by a quantum disruption device. Zorp's gelatinous form rippled with agreement. The incident has been dubbed the Fletcher event after the human responsible. Speaking of which, Zorp gestured toward a smaller platform, where a single, remarkably ordinary human male sat awkwardly in a chair, clearly designed for someone with more appendages. May I present Jack Fletcher, the human who has unintentionally demonstrated why their species' vocal capabilities may be the most underestimated weapon in the galaxy. All eyes, optical sensors, and sensory organs turned toward the human, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else in the universe. Now, before we bring Mr. Fletcher into our discussion, let us review the incident in question and determine whether human screams truly deserve to be classified as more dangerous than nuclear fire. Jack Fletcher hadn't planned on becoming an intergalactic incident. 3 months ago, he'd been a perfectly ordinary space trucker hauling processed algae from Saturn's rings to the colonies on Europa. At 35, with a receding hairline that retreated faster than his bank account grew, Jack's most notable feature was how utterly unremarkable he was. His small transport vessel, affectionately named the Payload, a joke that exactly 3 people in the galaxy found amusing, was equally unremarkable. A 20-year-old Orion-class hauler with just enough amenities to keep a human from going space crazy during the long hauls between stops. Jack had a small apartment on Lunar Colony that he visited maybe 4 times a year, a cat named Schrödinger that his neighbor Mrs. Patel took care of, and had probably secretly adopted by now, and a collection of vintage Earth music that he blasted through the Payload's tinny speakers to keep himself company. Never thought I'd end up here, Jack muttered to himself as he fidgeted in the alien chair, which seemed determined to cradle appendages he didn't possess. All because I needed to take a bathroom break at the wrong outpost. Indeed, Jack's path to becoming the Screamer had begun with the most mundane of human needs. After 48 hours of straight flying, he docked at Outpost Epsilon 9 for refueling, a shower that involved actual water rather than sonic pulses, and some non-rehydrated food. The outpost was one of the newer multi-species facilities, built to accommodate the increased trade between Earth and the galactic community since first contact 30 years ago. Jack's trouble started approximately 17 minutes after he'd ordered what passed for a coffee in the outpost's food court, a brew made from something that had never seen a coffee bean, but somehow captured the essence of overpriced airport coffee. Mr. Fletcher, Admiral Zorp's translator squawked, pulling Jack back to the present. Would you care to explain to the Council how you came to represent humanity in this hearing? Jack cleared his throat and leaned awkwardly toward what he hoped was a microphone. Well, since I was the one who, screamed, he said, the diplomatic corps thought I should be the one to explain it. They sent some fancy lawyer types with me, but they're waiting outside because apparently this first session is just fact-finding or something. What Jack didn't mention was how the Earth Diplomatic Corps had practically begged him to cooperate. This could determine humanity's standing in the galactic community for generations, the stern-faced diplomat had told him. So, for the love of God, Fletcher, don't make things worse. Jack had wanted to point out that he hadn't exactly planned to cause an interstellar incident in the first place, but he'd simply nodded instead. The image of the chaos he'd accidentally caused was still fresh in his mind: the shattered glass, the overturned food stalls, the unconscious aliens, and the blaring alarms as emergency protocols kicked in across the entire station. All because he had screamed when that spider squid thing had dropped from the ceiling onto his table. In his defense, Jack was terrified of spiders. Always had been, ever since his older brother had put one in his cereal when he was 6. And when you combined spider with squid and had it plummet directly into your pseudo-coffee from an air vent above, well, the results spoke for themselves. Mr. Fletcher will now describe the incident in his own words, announced Admiral Zorp, his gelatinous form rippling with what might have been anticipation. Please note that audio dampeners have been installed throughout the chamber as a precautionary measure. It was supposed to be a routine stop, Jack began, nervously eyeing the array of alien faces watching him with everything from optical sensors to chemical receptors. I docked at Epsilon 9 at around 0300 standard time. The station was running on night cycle, so it was pretty quiet. As Jack spoke, the chamber's central holographic display activated, showing security footage from Outpost Epsilon 9's food court. There was Jack, looking exhausted, sitting alone at a table designed for beings with very different proportions. He was hunched over a steaming cup, eyes half closed. I hadn't slept in about 50 hours, Jack continued. I'd been running behind schedule because of that meteor shower near Titan, and my client was threatening penalties if I didn't make the delivery window. So I was basically mainlining caffeine or whatever they call that stuff at the outpost. The footage continued silently. Jack on screen took a sip from his cup and grimaced. I remember thinking that if this was the best coffee substitute in the galaxy, maybe humanity had something to offer after all. He attempted a smile, but the joke fell flat in the tense chamber. On screen, Jack's head was nodding, clearly fighting sleep. Then, something moved in the ventilation shaft above him, something with multiple limbs. I didn't notice it at first, Jack said, his voice growing quieter. In my defense, who expects anything to come out of the air vents? Isn't that like a basic health code violation? The council watched as an XR peak maintenance worker, a creature resembling a cross between a tarantula and a squid, about the size of a house cat, emerged from the vent. It was performing routine maintenance, completely unaware of the human below. Then it lost its grip. The security footage showed the alien falling directly onto Jack's table, sending his coffee flying and its 8 limbs sprawling in surprise. What happened next had to be shown without audio for the safety of the council. Jack's mouth opened in what was clearly a scream of absolute terror. Though the footage was silent, the effects were immediately visible. Every glass surface in the food court shattered simultaneously. 3 different species of aliens collapsed, some clutching hearing organs, others vibrating uncontrollably. The XR peak maintenance worker instantly curled into a defensive ball, secreting a thick protective resin that hardened on contact with air. Most tellingly, the station's automated defense systems activated, emergency bulkheads slammed shut, and warning lights began flashing as the AI incorrectly identified the scream as a quantum disruption attack. I just screamed, Jack said, looking genuinely remorseful. Back on Earth, I'm known for having a pretty high-pitched scream when I'm startled. My friends used to jump out at me just to hear it, but I had no idea it would do that. Admiral Zorp's form bubbled with agitation. The maintenance worker, Technician K-Lit-ZK, remains in medical care. The protective resin she secreted in response to your vocalizations has hardened to such an extent that medical personnel are still attempting to safely remove it without causing further trauma. Jack winced. I really am sorry about that. Is she going to be okay? Eventually, Zorp replied flatly. The 2 melodians who were present suffered rupturing of their harmonic sacs roughly equivalent to what you would call eardrums, except they're used for both communication and balance. and the crystallite ambassador's aide experienced spontaneous fracturing along their tertiary resonance planes. "And that's bad?" Jack asked hesitantly. "Imagine if all your bones decided to vibrate at their resonant frequency simultaneously," General Blixar said, his crystalline form darkening with emotion. "Oh. Indeed," Admiral Zorp continued. "The station required 3 days of repairs, primarily to glass components and sensitive electronics that were damaged by the harmonic resonance of your scream. The defense system had to be manually reset by a team from the manufacturer." Jack slumped in his uncomfortable chair. "And that's why Earth sent me here, to apologize." "No, Mr. Fletcher," Zorp replied. "You are here because the incident raised serious questions about human physiological capabilities that were not disclosed during your species' integration into the galactic community. Professor Glixnar will now present the scientific analysis of human vocalizations and why they may represent a heretofore unrecognized threat." Professor Glixnar floated to the center of the chamber, her hover pod decorated with the insignia of the Galactic Institute of Xenobiology. A quantumite by species, she appeared as a shifting cloud of luminescent particles roughly contained in a vaguely humanoid shape. "Esteemed representatives," she began, her voice emanating directly from her particle cloud. "What we witnessed at Outpost Epsilon 9 appears to be an involuntary defensive mechanism of human physiology that we have severely underestimated." The holographic display shifted to show a detailed scan of human vocal anatomy. Humans produce sound by forcing air through their vocal cords, creating vibrations that are then amplified by their respiratory and oral cavities. Simple enough, and not dissimilar from many vocalizing species in the galaxy. What is unique, however, is the particular harmonic range humans can achieve when in a state of extreme fear or stress. The display shifted to show a spectrographic analysis of Jack's scream, with certain frequencies highlighted in pulsing red. Mr. Fletcher's vocalization registered at approximately 129 decibels at its source, impressive, but not unprecedented. However, the harmonic structure of the scream contains specific frequency patterns that interact with the neurological and physiological systems of numerous galactic species in unexpected ways. She gestured, and the display split to show various alien anatomies with areas highlighted that corresponded to the frequencies in Jack's scream. For melodians, these frequencies directly stimulate their balance organs, causing immediate disorientation. For crystallites, they match the exact resonant frequency of their tertiary lattice structure. For species with exoskeletons, like the XRRT peak-lake, they trigger an emergency defensive response typically reserved for planetary-scale threats. Professor Glixnar's particle cloud pulsed with what might have been academic excitement. In comparative terms, a human scream is more dangerous than nuclear fire for a simple reason. Radiation can be shielded against. We have understood its properties for millennia. But the human stress vocalization circumvents most conventional defenses because we never recognized it as a threat in the first place. Jack raised his hand tentatively. "But Professor, humans have been screaming for our entire history. It's just what we do when we're scared. Surely that can't be classified as a weapon." But context matters, Mr. Fletcher," Glixnar responded. "On Earth, surrounded by other humans who have evolved alongside this vocalization, its effects are minimal. In space, among species with radically different sensory apparatus, those same sound waves become unintentionally devastating." She turned back to the Council. To illustrate the severity, a Class 4 nuclear detonation would have caused less damage to Outpost Epsilon 9 than Mr. Fletcher's scream did. The radiation would have been contained by the station's shields, while the scream bypassed all defenses and affected organic and inorganic systems alike. Admiral Zorp's translator made a sound suspiciously like a sigh. "Professor, your recommendation?" Glixnar's particle cloud condensed slightly. "Based on our analysis, human stress vocalizations should indeed be classified as Category 1 threats. However, I recommend against restricting human movement in the galaxy, as has been suggested by some council members." A murmur ran through the assembly. Instead, she continued, I propose mandatory dampening technology be developed and implemented for all humans traveling off Earth. Think of it as similar to the containment fields we require for radioactive materials or the neural inhibitors rage beasts must wear in public spaces. Jack's jaw dropped. Wait, you want all humans to wear some kind of muzzle just because I screamed when a space spider fell on me? Not a muzzle, Mr. Fletcher, Glixnar corrected. A precisely calibrated dampening field that would activate only when specific vocal patterns indicative of a scream are detected. You would retain full ability to speak, sing, and even yell, just not scream at frequencies that could kill or maim other sentient beings. Jack slumped back in his chair. This was getting worse by the minute. And now, Admiral Zorp announced, Mr. Fletcher will present humanity's official defense against these recommendations. Jack stood awkwardly, painfully aware that he was quite possibly the worst person to be defending humanity's right to scream freely throughout the galaxy. He wasn't a diplomat, a scientist, or even particularly articulate. He was a space trucker who just happened to have an unfortunate encounter with an alien spider squid. So, thanks for that detailed scientific explanation, Professor, he began, fumbling with the notes the Earth Diplomatic Corps had hastily prepared for him. I'd like to begin by emphasizing that humans don't go around screaming on purpose. It's an involuntary response, like your protective resin thing, or whatever happens when crystallites get startled. General Blixar's crystalline form flashed briefly. We vibrate at a higher frequency to shatter potential threats. It is a controlled defense mechanism, not an indiscriminate sonic attack. Right, exactly, Jack said, seizing on the comparison despite it not really supporting his point. The thing is, humans have been part of the galactic community for 30 years now, and this is the first major incident involving a scream. That's got to count for something, right? Admiral Zorp's gelatinous form rippled in what might have been the equivalent of raised eyebrows. The rarity of an occurrence does not diminish its severity, Mr. Fletcher. Supernova explosions are rare, yet we take extensive precautions against them. Fair point, Jack conceded. But here's the thing, requiring all humans to wear dampening devices would not only be impractical, it would be seen as discriminatory. Humans are proud. We've overcome a lot to get to the stars, and being forced to wear what we'd essentially see as muzzles would be humiliating. An opaline delegate, a being composed entirely of shifting translucent planes, shimmered in what appeared to be amusement. Your species' pride is noted, but is hardly relevant to galactic security concerns. Jack shuffled his notes, realizing he was losing the room. Look, what if we compromise? Maybe situational dampeners in high-risk areas like space stations, but not something every human has to wear all the time. Yeah, or educational programs to help humans control our vocal responses in crisis situations. The council members exchanged glances, some using actual eyes, others communicating through pheromones, bioluminescence, or quantum entanglement. Mr. Fletcher raises practical considerations, acknowledged Professor Glixnar. Perhaps a graduated approach. She never got to finish her thought. And from the upper gallery of the chamber, there came a sudden commotion. A maintenance drone had malfunctioned and was spinning wildly, shooting sparks. As horrible luck would have it, the drone plummeted down directly toward the council floor, trailing electricity. And it was heading straight for Jack. What happened next would later be described in the official council records as the second Fletcher event. Jack, seeing a sparking mechanical object hurtling toward his face, did what any reasonable human might do. He screamed. Again. Despite the audio dampeners installed throughout the chamber, Jack's scream somehow hit a resonant frequency with the chamber's architecture itself. The dampeners, designed to attenuate sound, actually created a standing wave pattern that amplified certain harmonics of his scream. The effects were immediate and chaotic. The crystallite delegation shattered into thousands of glittering fragments. They would later reform but were extremely displeased. 3 different species of delegates experienced spontaneous molting. The quantumites, including Professor Glixnar, briefly destabilized, their particle clouds expanding to twice their normal size before painfully reconsolidating. Most dramatically, Admiral Zorb's gelatinous form vibrated so intensely that he temporarily lost cohesion, splashing across the central table before slowly reforming into his usual shape, now tinted an angry shade of purple. When order was finally restored some 20 minutes later, Jack stood in the center of the chamber, surrounded by the aftermath of his accidental demonstration, but looking both mortified and oddly vindicated. "So," he said into the stunned silence, "about those situational dampeners I mentioned. 3 hours, 17 formal apologies, and one thorough medical examination of the council chamber later, the Galactic Security Council reconvened to deliver their verdict." Jack sat nervously in his uncomfortable chair, surrounded now by 4 heavily armed guards wearing what appeared to be specialized audio-dampening helmets. Admiral Zorp, fully reconstituted but still faintly purple, addressed the chamber. "After direct experience with the human defense mechanism in question, this council has reached a unanimous decision." Jack held his breath. "Human screams will indeed be classified as Category 1 weapons of galactic destruction," Zorp announced, his translator conveying the gravity of his tone. "However, we recognize the impracticality and diplomatic implications of requiring dampening devices for all humans." A ripple of surprise went through the assembly. "Instead, the following regulations will be implemented immediately. First, all multi-species facilities will be retrofitted with specialized audio dampeners calibrated specifically to human stress vocalizations. Second, warning signs will be mandatory in areas where humans work or live, similar to radiation warnings or gravity variation alerts." Jack couldn't believe what he was hearing. It seemed almost reasonable. "Third," Zorp continued, "all species entering human-occupied areas will be provided with single-use emergency audio dampeners, similar to the emergency oxygen masks on your atmospheric vehicles." And finally, he concluded, "A galactic education initiative will be established to teach non-humans about human startle responses and to teach humans techniques for controlling their vocalizations in emergency situations." The chamber erupted into discussion, most of it surprisingly positive. Jack caught fragments of conversation: pragmatic approach, respect for autonomy while ensuring safety, quite reasonable given the circumstances. Professor Glixnar's particle cloud drifted over to Jack. "A most favorable outcome, Mr. Fletcher. Your accidental demonstration proved more persuasive than any scientific data I could have presented." Jack chuckled nervously. "So I'm not going to jail for assaulting the council with my voice?" "On the contrary," she replied, particles shimmering in apparent amusement. "You've been appointed as humanity's representative to the new Human Vocalization Safety Commission. Your expertise is now considered invaluable." "Expertise in screaming like a terrified child?" Jack asked incredulously. "Precisely." And 2 weeks later, Jack Fletcher returned to Earth a reluctant hero. The headlines ranged from the dramatic, "The scream heard across the galaxy," to the amusingly accurate, "Space trucker's girly scream saves humanity from galactic muzzling." The payload was upgraded at the government's expense, a thank-you gift that included a first-class cabin and a top-of-the-line coffee maker that used actual coffee beans. His cat, Schrödinger, was indeed living happily with Mrs. Patel, but they worked out a shared custody arrangement. Jack's new position as humanity's Scream ambassador came with a substantial salary and the unusual duty of occasionally demonstrating the human stress response under carefully controlled conditions for scientific and educational purposes. It wasn't the career he'd imagined for himself, but it beat hauling algae across the solar system. As for the galactic community, human scream drills became as common on space stations as fire drills once were on Earth. And a popular alien tourist activity on Earth became attending horror movies to observe humans screaming in a safe, controlled environment. And that, dear listeners, is why the Galactic Security Council now considers human screams more dangerous than nuclear fire, and why Jack Fletcher goes down in history as the man whose girly scream changed interstellar policy forever.